Thanks to you. Cidra allowed herself to absorb the shock of his simple observation. All by herself she had destroyed the only known members of an intelligent, spacefaring race. She was unnerved by the thought. Severance saw the look on her face and hastily changed the subject. I wonder how old those eggs were. The skeleton in the case wasn't exactly fresh. It could have been lying in the ship for hundreds of years. But the eggs were ready to hatch. They might have been capable of staying viable for years in the shell until the right conditions occurred for them to hatch, Cidra pointed out. Perhaps the pilot of the ship was wounded in the crash. He followed the mind call and left the eggs in what appeared to be a safe location. Apparently, Matt's telepathic call works on any sort of intelligent mind. He set up his own protective device to ensure that eventually something would wander into the safehold and become food for the eggs. Then he went back to die in the ship. The case in which we found the skeleton might have been some sort of medical facility, which failed. As people keep observing, it's hard to keep machinery working on Renaissance. She smiled. You seem to do a fairly good job of it, though. He shrugged. I told you, I've always been good with my hands. We make a good team, don't we? My brains and your brawn. He gave her a sardonic glance. I may not be a near genius like your friend Mercer, but once in a while I manage to think my way through things. I can still take every piece of sardite you have in a game of free market. At the mention of Mercer, Cidra flinched. She hadn't thought about him or about Clementia for quite a while. The humor faded from her eyes as she grew pensive. Yes, you're still better at free market than I am. Severance swore somewhat viciously and asked himself what in a renegade's hell had made him mention her idol, Mercer. Cidra was right. He might be good with his hands, but he wasn't always the fastest thinker in the universe. Severance slowly finished the last of his presspock, aware that Cidra had slipped off into her own thoughts. She was thinking of Clementia. He knew it, and the realization hit him in the gut. Clementia and a lofty relationship unsoiled by a wolf's passion and need. Severance asked himself bluntly what he had to offer compared to the wise and distant Mercer. The cabin of Severance Pay was a far cry from the formal gardens and glowing fountains of Clementia. Hardly the sort of place in which a gently bred woman would want to set up housekeeping with a man who occasionally drank too much ale and who would frequently reach for her with a hunger he couldn't disguise as platonic love. Are you going to give up your search, Cidra? She blinked herself back to an awareness of him and smiled wanly. I think I've had enough of alien mind tapping. Perhaps one has to be born a harmonic to feel comfortable with the idea of someone or something else inside one's head. It doesn't seem right somehow, he agreed. I didn't like being manipulated by either the good guys or the bad guys during the past couple of days. We learned to control the manipulation to a certain extent, she reminded him. I still don't feel comfortable with the whole idea of mind communication. Severance set down the presspock and leaned back on his elbow, gazing into the flamer. I never will. She followed his gaze. As I said, perhaps one has to be born a harmonic to have mind touch feel natural and right. I wasn't born a true harmonic. But you were raised as one. Yes. Cidra, he began with a rough edge in his voice Matt he couldn't control. You can go back to Clementia, can't you? She raised her eyebrows in surprise. Of course. No one kicked me out. I left of my own accord. It's my home. I can go back whenever I wish. And work in the archives? I'm a good archivist, even if I'm not a harmonic, she said firmly. Besides, I'm the only archivist they've got who's bothered to make a speciality out of First Family tales. I have virtually a whole field to myself. What would they do without you? He tried to make it a joke, but didn't think he pulled it off. She took the question seriously. They'd relegate First Family tales to the bottom of the pile of acceptable literature. No big deal. It's already on the bottom of the pile. I did get Mercer to admit once that the sociological implications of some of the first traditions were interesting, but that was about all. Severance stared at her grimly. She could and would go back. He had nothing to offer her to induce her to stay. Nothing to put up against all that Clementia could offer. She would go home and take with her all the tenderness, companionship, loyalty, and passion she had brought into his life. Severance's hand tightened into a frustrated knot on his thigh. Coolly he forced himself to relax. He would take her back to Port Try again, put her on a freighter, and never see her again. Something knotted up again, this time inside. Never see her again. The years stretched out ahead of him, as empty as the farthest reaches of the galaxy. We'd better go to bed. We've had a long day. He got to his feet and began the small ritual of checking the deflectors. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Cidra obediently pick up the remains of dinner and dispose of them. A few minutes later she disappeared into the tent. He kept himself busy for as long as possible, thinking of her crawling into her own sleeper and fastening the closure. When he could delay things no longer, he went into the tent. She had blanked the light, and it took a while for his eyes to adjust. Severance peeled off his shirt and yanked off the boots. Unconsciously, he put the pulsar and utility loop within easy reach and fumbled for the opening of his own sleeper. Deliberately, he kept his eyes off the other portable bunk. If he allowed himself to look at Cidra in bed, he knew he would crawl in with her, regardless of whether or not she invited him. He was selfish enough to take what memories he could. Hell, he was wolf enough to take what he could. He took a deep breath and a savage grip on himself and turned to slide into his sleeper. His hand touched a bare female shoulder before he realized that the bed was already occupied. Cidra. What are you doing in here? She smiled up at him in the shadows. Waiting for you. What took you so long? You shouldn't be here. Going to throw me out? Sweet harmony, I haven't got the strength. He unfastened his trousers and stepped out of them, leaving them lying on the floor of the tent. With a heavy groan he crawled into the sleeper and found Cidra naked and waiting. He buried his face against her *********, aware that his body was hardening already with a fierce desire. I doubt that I'd ever have the strength to throw you out of my bed. I'm glad. Her fingers laced through his hair as her body stirred against his. He felt her soft leg moving along his thigh, and the tight ache in his loins became a fire almost instantly. She had such a powerful effect on him that he would have been alarmed if he hadn't been so excited. Severance stroked her, savoring the curve of her hip and the smoothness of her belly. At this moment he easily convinced himself he had a right to this night. She would be gone all too soon from his life. Hungrily he sought and found her lips, drinking the taste of her into his veins. He would never forget the sensation of probing the sweet warmth of her mouth. Her small tongue darted around his a little anxiously at first and then with greater boldness. Her body arched, opening to his touch. When he drew a palm across one breast, he could feel the nipple tighten. The response sent a wave of excitement through him. She was his. The need and the longing roared through him, swamping the knowledge that soon he would have to send Cidra back to Clementia. The primitive certainty that she belonged to him and no one or no place else was too strong in that moment. Severance forgot about the morning and what it must bring in the way of reality. Tonight was his, and he was going to take all he could get. Cidra, you feel so good. Do you know what you're doing to me? I'm learning. He moved one hand lower, threading his fingers through the wonderfully soft tangle of hair below her stomach, and then he could feel the gathering moistness between her legs. The sensual dampness dazed him, almost overwhelming him with a sense of anticipation. He probed gently, and when she gasped, he probed again. He could never get enough of her soft cries of excitement. Touch me, Cidra. I want to feel your hands on me. He caught her hand and guided it down to his throbbing manhood. When her fingers closed tenderly around him, he shut his eyes and forced himself to take a calming breath. What's wrong? She sounded anxious and nothing, he told her, his voice tight. You have the damnedest effect on me, little saint. Touch me again. I'm a glutton for punishment. Like this? He nipped her shoulder as she obeyed. Yes, he muttered as she gently used her nails on him. Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly right. He gloried in the feel of her, moving his hand beneath her lushly rounded bu***ox and finding the dark cleft between them. She flinched at the unfamiliar caress, and he held her more tightly until she relaxed again and let herself respond. When he had her straining urgently beneath him, he let his hand rove elsewhere. He teased the parting folds of flesh that guarded the entrance to her warm, fragrant core. She moved pleadingly under the touch, closing her thighs around his hand as if she would draw him further into her. "Do you want me?" he asked, his voice harsh with his own need. "I want you. I want you, Severance. Not half as much as I want you." He lifted himself, sliding her into position under his heaviness, and then lowered himself along the length of her. "Wrap your legs around me, love." She did. He had been poised on the threshold, and when she lifted her legs to clasp his thighs, the movement forced him into her. He heard his name on her lips and felt her shiver as he thrust forward, taking her completely. Then she was clinging to him, her br***sts soft beneath his chest, her body strong and supple as she held on to him with all her might. He would never be able to get enough of her, Severance thought fleetingly. Not even if he had her all to himself for the rest of his life. She accepted the rhythm he established, augmenting it with her own inner muscles. The resulting harmony sent both of them spiraling upward to an inevitable conclusion. Severance lifted his head to watch her face as he felt the beginning of her joyous release. He wanted to watch her expression forever, but already the sight and feel of her satisfaction were driving him over the edge of his own. He sucked in his breath and surged forward one last time, sinking himself into her until all sense of separateness was gone. The two of them felt like a single entity. And then he just held on, clutching her more tightly than he would hold on to a pulsar in the middle of the jungle. Cidra. It was a long time before either of them surfaced in the darkness of the tent. In mutual silence, they lay listening to each other's breathing and to the sounds of the night beyond dye deflectors. At long last Cidra stirred, stretching luxuriously in a movement that brushed her breast along Severance's rib cage. "Good night, Severance." Her voice was soft and sleepy as she curled into him. "Good night, Cidra." He felt her drift off to sleep, a bundle of feminine contentment in his arms. Then he lay awake for a long time and thought about the future. Cidra awoke the next morning feeling decidedly stiff. The sleeper could accommodate two people in a pinch, but it wasn't really designed for the extra crowd. Tentatively she moved her leg and felt Severance turn in response. His arm, which was lying across her br********, tightened. He yawned in her ear. "Do you think your bunk on the ship is going to be big enough for both of us? Or will you rig up something to connect the upper and lower berths?" she asked drowsily. "My bunk." "Do you mean on the ship?" "Uh-huh. I hadn't thought about it." "Well," she announced grandly, "you'd better, hadn't you? You're the one who's always worrying about little details." He stilled for a moment and then slowly levered himself up on one elbow to gaze down at her searchingly. She smiled smugly, wondering why he was looking so serious. "You're talking about staying on severance pay with me? I'm a full-fledged member of the crew, remember?" She reached up and toyed with his tousled hair. He ignored her. "You're going back to Clementia." "Nope. I'm going to QED to help deliver the mail." She tugged at a lock experimentally. He didn't seem to notice. The first faint trickle of alarm passed through her. "Severance? You have to go back to Clementia, Cidra." His voice sounded raw. "Why?" "Because that's where you want to go." She shook her head with grave certainty. "No. Not anymore. I want to be with you. But you belong in Clementia. It's your home. Your work is there. The people you care about, I care about you now." He drew a deep breath as if preparing himself for an unpleasant task. "You have to go back." His dogged stubbornness began to make an impression. "Why do I have to go back? Just because you say so?" "Yes, damn it." He sat up abruptly, pushing aside the cover of the sleeper. In the muted morning light that passed through the tent screen, the muscles of his shoulders and back were set and rigid. You have to go back to Clementia because you've been saying all along that you belong there. Your life's ambition is to be a harmonic. I'm not a harmonic. I never was one and I never will be one. I know that now. He looked at her. But you can live like one. You can change your fancy gown 4 times a day, practice all the rituals, study the philosophy and the laws. Part of you is harmonic, Cidra. Hell, harmonics aren't an alien race living among humans. Some part of every human being is harmonic. You can indulge that part of yourself. All you'll lack is the telepathic ability. You were born into that world, and you can't possibly know for certain that you want to leave it permanently. I do know for certain, she said calmly. I'm ready to leave it permanently. Get one thing straight, Cidra. If you do leave it to come with me, you can never go back. I wouldn't let you go back. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you want me to come with you? She countered. He closed his eyes for an anguished instant. When he opened them, his gaze was very hard. In that moment he was all wolf. Sweet harmony, yes. Yes, damn it, I want you to come with me. But not unless you're absolutely sure it's what you want too. I'm sure. Cidra, you can't possibly know that. It's too soon. She tilted her head as understanding dawned. You don't trust me, do you? He was startled. What do you mean, I don't trust you? It's true. You don't trust me. You're afraid I don't know my own mind. Well, that's one thing about being a wolf, Severance. You have to learn to trust the hard way. You have to take a chance. I'm not going to take a chance on this. It's too important. And don't give me any lectures on what it means to be a wolf. I'm the wolf here. So am I. Only because I made you into one. Cidra began to get angry. Don't go taking all the credit for everything, Teague Severance. You're always so anxious to assume responsibility, to be the pilot in command, that you tend to forget I'm capable of free will and clear thinking too. I've got news for you, this is a decision I'm making all by myself. Be reasonable, Cidra. You've only been away from Clementia for about 3 weeks. So much has happened to you in that time that you can't possibly be thinking clearly. I was trained to think clearly under all circumstances. He eyed her. You're starting to lose your temper. Astute observation. I'm getting very angry, Severance. Cidra, all I'm asking is that you consider this in a calm, rational manner. You've been under a great deal of strain lately. Strain? I've been seduced, assaulted by wild beasts, attacked by alien illusions, obliged to eat meat, and taught to gamble. Yes, I've been under a strain. But that doesn't mean I can't think straight. It's wolves such as you who get muddle-headed in emotional circumstances. And the fact that you are presently in just such a circumstance is the only reason I'm making allowances for your behavior at the moment. I'm the best crewmate you ever had, Teague Severance. I'm loyal, trustworthy, and intelligent. If you had any sense, you'd realize just how lucky you are and get down on your knees in gratitude. He stared at her as she sat up in the sleeper, her long hair spilling around her shoulders and dancing across the tips of her BR*********. Her eyes were full of fire and daunting determination. He felt himself wavering in the face of it. Summoning all his fortitude, he stood firm. Cidra, I know you think you mean what you say. I do mean what I say. But this decision is too important. To whom? To me, you little idiot. Will you listen to me? I'm trying to do what's best for both of us. You're just trying to protect yourself, she retorted. He started to argue and then halted abruptly. Maybe I am. He looked away from her. I couldn't bear it if I took you with me and you changed your mind a season or 2 from now. I couldn't bear to watch you pining for the gardens of Clementia and the love of a man who will never want to make love to you. It would destroy me, Cidra. She heard the gritty truth in his words and knew her first sense of genuine uncertainty. She didn't doubt her own feelings for a moment, but she had to acknowledge that Severance had a right to be unsure of her. From the moment he had met her, she had talked mainly of finding a way to go back to Clementia. She couldn't blame him for doubting her change of heart and mind. "What about a compromise?" she asked softly. He swung around to face her. "What kind of compromise?" "I'm not going to be a visiting lover for you. I won't agree to just drop in and sleep with you occasionally when I happen to be near Clementia." Her head came up proudly. "I'm not interested in such a thin relationship either. For the record, I won't be a convenient resource for a little special handling when you're between mail runs." "I know, Matt." "Very well, then, why don't we try a more or less platonic association for a while? The way we did for 2 weeks on the hop from Lovelady to Renaissance?" "You're out of your tuned mind. I'd never survive." "Talk about strain." "Then you suggest something," she shot back. His face hardened. "All right, I will. Go back to Clementia, but, Severance, go back to Clementia while I finish the run to QED. When I get back, I'll come to Clementia. If you're still sure you want to come away with me, I'll take you." She drew a breath. "It's 6 weeks from here to QED, and then 8 more to get back to Lovelady. That's a long time, Severance. Long enough for you to be sure of what you're doing." Cidra felt her stomach tighten as she saw the determination in him. "You really don't trust me to know what I'm doing, do you? I think you need time." "What if you don't come back for me, Severance?" she asked softly. "You'll have to trust me to come back, just as I'll have to trust you to be waiting." "Wolves have a very hard time with trust, don't they?" she whispered. "Yes." Chapter 18. It's amazing how sophisticated and cosmopolitan Port Try Again looks after a few days in the jungle. Cidra grinned across the table at Deesma Cady, who was halfway through a meat stew. "Renaissance has a way of giving one a new perspective on things." Deesma chuckled. "I know what you mean. But cosmopolitan as we may be, you're still drawing a few stares. Most of these renegades wouldn't blink at a charging Zaylon, but they've blinked several times at that beautiful dress." She inclined her head to indicate the other diners in the restaurant. Cidra glanced down at her yellow gold early evening gown. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. It's just that it felt so good to get back into my own clothes." She added quickly, "Not that I didn't appreciate your advice on the practical clothing for the jungle. I don't know what I would have done without the trousers and shirt. I doubt Severance would have allowed you to go trekking off without the right gear. He's usually very conscious of details such as that. I wonder where he is." "Attending to more details." Cidra grimaced. "He's negotiating a deal with 2 of the biggest scientific firms who have representatives here at Try Again. He's been at it ever since we got back last night. When it comes to business, that man has the tenacity of a lockmouth," Deesma observed. "He deserves a break like this. He's worked hard to build Severance Pay Limited into one of the most reliable of the small mail runners. The stake he gets from selling the information you 2 discovered will go a long way toward helping him set up a major business operation." Desma's eyes glowed. "Sweet harmony, what a find. Absolutely fantastic. I just hope my firm makes the high bid. With any luck, I'll get a piece of the project." "I'm sure Severance will sell to your company," Cidra said politely. "He knows you'd like to be involved. He'll sell to the highest bidder. Period. When it comes to something this big, Severance isn't going to let sentiment interfere." "How are the veggies?" Deesma peered at the pile of greens and tubers on Cidra's plate. "Wonderful. To be quite honest, I don't care if I never have occasion to eat meat again." Poor Cidra. "This whole thing has been quite an adventure for you, hasn't it? Starting with that night in my lab when you drove off the intruder. I take it he hasn't turned up?" Deesma shook her head. "No, damn it. I'd give my last research report to get my hands on him. The company guards have circulated the description, but I'm afraid it wasn't very useful." "I know." Cidra's mouth curved wryly. "The one look at his features that I got wasn't very good. He had such an expression of horror and fear on his face, and the light from those bugs was so bizarre that I doubt I'd recognize him again myself. Well, if he knows what's good for him, he won't come near enough to you to let you have a look. Severance would feed him to a draken. Disma stopped short at the look on Cidra's face. What's the matter? Did I say something wrong? It's just an expression. I know, Cidra assured her hurriedly. I'm still getting accustomed to Renaissance colloquialisms. She blanked out her mental image of the last meal Severance had fed to the drakens and grimly went back to work on her greens. You'd better get used to the local slang, Disma said cheerfully. Severance spends a fair amount of time on Renaissance. Her friendly eyes narrowed. I take it you will be traveling with him for a while? I'll be traveling with him. As soon as he gets through behaving in his current stubborn, authoritarian, dictatorial manner. Cidra's smile thinned. He's insisting that I return to Clementia until he gets back from the run to QED. Interesting, Disma murmured. Is that connected to the reason why he spent last night in the ship and you're rooming with me again? Somehow, when I saw the two of you yesterday, I got the feeling that certain matters in your, partnership had been resolved. We don't have a partnership. I'm just a member of his crew. Cidra stabbed at a golden-skinned tuber. She was getting better at using a knife on food. What do you make of the alien ship, Disma? From what you've told me, it could be almost anything from a lone scouting foray that went astray to a colony ship. Assuming it is an alien vessel. There's still the possibility that the point of origin is somewhere in the Stanza 9 system. We may never know. There were only 5 eggs. Hardly enough to colonize a new planet. Perhaps there were several small ships headed somewhere else, and this one went off course. Cidra chewed her lower lip. I hope this was just a lone ship. T would hate to think of facing a large number of those blue monsters. The hatchling's behavior when it emerged from the egg seemed entirely instinctive. Oh, yes. All it wanted to do was eat. I think there was some kind of homing device built into the shell. Probably designed to lead it back to the ship eventually. Who knows what's stored in that ship? Perhaps the equivalent of an archive. Perhaps once led back to the ship, the young would discover their heritage. I imagine Renaissance looked like paradise to whatever piloted them here. Well, it didn't prove to be a paradise, Disma observed coolly. The machinery broke down and the hatchlings fell victim to the first intelligent predators who found them. Cidra swallowed uncomfortably. Don't remind me. Do you have any idea what it's like to know you've wiped out the 5 surviving members of an intelligent race? Don't start feeling guilty. From what you've told me, the first hatchling was going to eat Severance for lunch. Probably would have turned on you next. Cidra nodded gloomily. You know, it was strange, Disma. There's no sense of alienness about the ghosts. They're different from us and we're fascinated by them, but we're more or less comfortable with the idea that they belonged in this system. It wasn't the same with the blue creatures. They felt wrong, somehow. I hated that hatchling on sight. Small wonder. You've still got your primitive human instincts, Cidra, even if you have been reared in Clementia. I'm sure those instincts were working at full strength when you saw the egg crack. Your primary reaction was to protect Severance. And a brilliant reaction it was too, declared a new voice. Cidra glanced up in surprise as Severance grabbed a vacant chair, shoved it near hers, and sank down onto it in his usual sprawl. He looked extraordinarily pleased with himself. He signaled for a mug of Renaissance rose ale and leaned back to smile smugly at the two women. I take it, Disma said, that you have concluded a successful negotiating session? Right. And you'll be happy to know that your firm coughed up the necessary credit to get first crack at the ship. Disma's eyes gleamed. Fantastic. Who got the safe hold? Vinton Archaeology. Demsa nodded. They'll do a first-class job. When do you show them their new finds? We leave at dawn tomorrow. It's a big event. 4 skimmers and 2 research crews. After I've helped them locate the safehold and the ship, I'm going to take one of the skimmers on up the river to the XLX camp. I've still got those reading sensors to deliver. You don't mind if Cidra stays with you for a few days? Of course not. She'll be returning to Lovelady on the next commercial freighter. But it doesn't leave until the end of the week. Cidra cut savagely into another tuber. How much, Severance? He gave her a sidelong glance. How much what? Credit. How much did you get in exchange for the locations of the safehold and the ship? She didn't look at him. Her whole attention was on her meal, 500,000. Cidra nearly dropped her knife. 500,000? Sweet Harmony, that's a fortune. I know. The ale arrived, and Severance took a healthy swallow. His eyes were glittering over the rim. A very nice steak. 500,000. Disma's tone was odd. Congratulations, Severance. I'll want a recorded contract for my share, naturally, Cidra said. 250,000. Severance set down his mug with great care. I beg your pardon? You heard me. She continued eating the remains of the tuber. I'll want a contract. Properly sealed and recorded. And I'll want it before you leave tomorrow morning. We'd better find a contract office tonight. Severance's gray eyes slitted. Why do you want a recorded contract? You know the answer to that. Remember all those games of free market, Severance? The one lesson you drilled into me was that you can't trust a wolf. Always count the cubes before you start play. In the case of a two-way split of 500,000, I'll want to get it on tape and get it recorded. The frozen silence at the table was broken only by die sound of Cidra continuing to eat the tuber. Disma stayed very still, watching the other two from under her lashes. Severance just stared at Cidra, his gaze brooding and malevolent. You don't need a contract and you know it, he finally said. How do I know it? You're taking off for QED as soon as you get back from this little jaunt up the river. After QED, who knows where you'll go and what you'll do? I may never see you again. She smiled grimly. I have to protect my share of the profits. Severance continued to glare at her for another moment, and then he turned on Disma. Did you put this idea in her head? Hastily, Disma put up a hand. Not me. I had nothing to do with it. I, said Cidra calmly, thought of it all on my own. This is ridiculous. Severance's voice was tight. He took another large swallow of ale. A woman alone can't be too careful. This is a form of retaliation, isn't it? You're madder than hell because I'm sending you back to Clementia. Cidra waved her fingers in a graceful, airy gesture. I'm merely putting into practice all the things I've been learning recently. Yeah? He leaned closer. And what else that you've teamed recently are you planning to put into practice? Cidra smiled gamely, even though she was fully aware of the newly erratic nature of her pulse. She had to struggle to control her breathing. Severance could be very intimidating when he chose. You needn't concern yourself with anything except the details of splitting the credit. Why, you little, he made an obvious effort at regaining control of his own temper. Then he slammed the half-empty mug down on the table and got to his feet. You want a recorded contract? All right, you'll get one. We'll take care of the details right now. But I haven't finished my dinner. We do it now or not at all. He turned to Disma. You, he informed her, can act as a witness. Disma struggled to hide her amusement. I'll be happy to do so. Quickly she paid for the meal and stood. Ready when you are. The deed was done in almost total silence. By the time her signature had been recorded and her voice print used to verify it, Cidra was almost shaking. Severance was furious. He scrawled his name beside hers, barked into the voice print recorder, and escorted her out of the contracts office in a chilled silence. He didn't speak until he had deposited the women at Disma's door. Severance stood in front of Cidra, feet braced slightly apart, one thumb hooked in his utility belt. He was the very picture of a man scorned. "I'll see you when I get back." His words sounded more like a threat than a promise. "Fine." Cidra hung on to her poise with sheer willpower, wrapping it around herself like an early evening gown. "I trust you will have a swift, safe trip. Thank you for the kind wishes." The heavy irony in Severance's tone was enough to dampen any further gestures of reconciliation. "Just one more thing." "Yes, Severance? You are now officially a very rich young woman. As long as my name was the only one on the credit account, no one would have bothered you. But as of tonight, you've become a prize." "A prize?" "Any reading renegade who thinks he can talk you into bed and out of your credit will probably try." "I'm not that naive, Severance. You'd better exercise some common sense while I'm gone. If I get back and find out you've done something foolish, You'll what?" she challenged. "I'll feed whoever succeeded in seducing you to the river. And when I'm finished with him, I'll tear several long and painful strips off your soft hide." Uneasily, Cidra tried to outglare him. "You have no rights over me. Don't bet on it. Officially, you're still a member of my crew. And I'm still the pilot in command." He stepped closer and seized her by the shoulders, pulling her against his hard body. "Goodbye, Cidra. Behave yourself while I'm gone, or there'll be hell to pay when I get back. I promise you." His mouth came down on hers, quick and hard. Then he turned on his booted heel and started down the street. "Severance." He halted and glanced back, his face set in forbidding lines. "What? Don't you dare give away those sensors. You make sure you get paid for delivering them, do you hear me?" "I can hear you just fine. So can everyone else in the vicinity." He vanished into the night. Cidra awoke the next morning to find Fred collapsed across her ankle. She opened one eye and tentatively wriggled her foot. "Up and at 'em, Fred. You can't sleep all day." The rock rug wriggled into a more comfortable position. He had been as happy as a rock rug could be to see both Severance and herself when they had returned, although Disma claimed that he had made himself at home in her household. So much at home, in fact, that he had munched 2 of her valued exhibits before someone discovered he'd wriggled into a cage. The huge flutter moths inside hadn't stood a chance. Fred had been discovered with a wingtip still draped rakishly from one corner of his mouth. Cidra worked free of the rock rug's light weight and headed for the large, comfortable lave. It was a joy to spend as long as she wanted under the invigorating spray without worrying about Severance reading her a lecture on conservation. The thought of Severance sent Cidra into a reverie that lasted for nearly half an hour. The spray pummeled her as she considered her parting argument with the self-proclaimed pilot in command. He hadn't been pleased by her lack of trust. Well, what did he expect? She demanded at Disma at breakfast. "Sometimes he makes me very angry. He's being so arbitrary about packing me off to Clementia." "So arbitrary that you felt compelled to get even?" Disma poured coffee and savored the aroma. Cidra winced. "I don't know what came over me. I hadn't planned to insist on a contract for my share of the credit. Severance would never have cheated me. But when he came into the restaurant looking so smug and in charge last night, I couldn't stand it. There's nothing wrong with ensuring your half of the deal. Except that I insulted Severance in the process. I think he sees himself as having some obligation to protect me. He's got a very overdeveloped sense of responsibility, Disma. That's the real reason I'm being shipped back to Clementia. Severance feels obligated to give me a chance to make up my own mind about the future. He feels guilty for having pushed me into everything that happened here on Renaissance. The decision to come to Renaissance was yours, wasn't it?" Disma looked at her searchingly. "Oh, definitely. But that doesn't seem to keep Severance from assuming the responsibility. Maybe it's because you remind him of Jude. He's always felt responsible for what happened to his brother." "Well, I'm not Jude. What's more, I've learned that I never will be a harmonic. The truth is," Cidra added slowly, "I wouldn't want to be one now, even if someone could wave a wand and turn my mind into a harmonically tuned brain. Because of Severance? Because of a lot of things. Severance is the main reason, but there are others. Cidra paused, remembering the scenes in the safe hold. Wait until you see the tapes of the ghost's history, Disma. It's very sad. From what I can tell, they were once a strong, aggressive race Matt managed to control Renaissance. Then they moved on to populate Lovelady and QED. But they never went any farther. Something happened. It's hard to tell from the visual record, but it looks as though they simply stopped expanding and started turning inward. For a while toward the end of the history, everything appears idyllic. The architecture is beautiful, the faces are serene, the lifestyle looks gentle and harmonious. But it doesn't last long. There are no children in the later images, just fewer and fewer ghosts, gradually fading away until the jungle swamps them. I realized later that it made me angry to see them just give up and die out. I wanted them to go on living, to fight back, to expand. Instead, they became so serene and so passive, they lost the will to survive as a species. It made me think of what might happen if all humans suddenly became harmonics. You don't think they'd survive? I think they'd go the way of the ghosts, Cidra said bluntly. The truth is, harmonics are not really constitutionally built to survive under adverse circumstances. Do you know that my mother had to be totally unconscious for hours before I was born? The trauma of childbirth is enough to kill a harmonic female, even if there are no complications. That's one of the reasons why it's such a major decision when a harmonic couple decides to have a child. Disma, I don't want to be that weak. I've learned a great deal about myself during the past few days. Given a choice, I'll fight. I think, under the right circumstances, I could actually kill another human being. And I've already proven that I can kill other creatures. Does the knowledge scare you? A little. But I've accepted it. I don't want to retreat to Clementia. Harmonics are a luxury for the human race. They are valuable and to some extent they are our conscience. But I'd rather be a survivor than a luxury. Cidra's mouth curved. And I'd rather fight with Severance than go back to Clementia and worship Mercer from afar. Who's Mercer? Cidra grinned. Another harmonic on whom nature wasted a pair of gorgeous shoulders and the darkest eyes you've ever seen. For ages I told myself I loved him for his mind. I lied. Disma burst out laughing. Does Severance know about him? Irritates the hell out of him. But I think Mercer worries him too. Severance is afraid I'll start dreaming of the perfect platonic relationship somewhere between Renaissance and QED. I never could imagine Severance being very good at a platonic relationship with you, Disma mused. He's not. Oh, he tried hard for a while, inspired by his noble sense of responsibility, no doubt. But it didn't last. Now I'm the one who's worried. He's shipping me out on a commercial freighter, the same way he shipped out that woman with whom he once signed a convenience contract. What if he doesn't come back for me, Disma? Disma smiled reassuringly. You've got a contract with him to split the credit from this trip, remember? Nothing like a business agreement to tie two people together. Cidra brightened a bit. That's true. Severance had been right about one thing. During the next 2 days, Cidra was aware that she was attracting more than merely curious attention. Friends of Severance materialized out of nowhere, professing eager interest in Cidra's health and welfare. Most were concerned that she enjoy herself in port try again while Severance was gone. Cidra was frequently stopped on the street, and Disma was prevailed upon to make introductions. Cidra handled the new attention with classic harmonic politeness. It would be humorous if it wasn't for the fact that all this interest in me merely proves Severance was right one more time, she told Disma at one point. I've had 3 invitations for dinner this evening, 4 for tomorrow night, and half a dozen offers to buy me a drink. One very nice man asked if I was interested in playing free market. I got the feeling that I was going to be encouraged to put up my contract as a bet. Severance would explode if he found out. Cidra smiled a little savagely. Yes, he would, wouldn't he? What's happening to me, Disma? I never used to be vindictive or irrational and emotional. You're scared, Disma said gently. I'm afraid so. I have no real hold on Severance. A couple of nights in his bed and a shared adventure. That's all. It's pleasant to think Matt the contract ties us together, but it won't. Not really. Not the way I want it to hold us. He said he'll come back for you. I know. But he's a wolf. Disma frowned. You're afraid he won't keep his word? I'm afraid he'll change his mind, that perhaps when he made the statement, he didn't really know his own mind. You're a wolf too. You might change your mind or fail to keep your word. You might not be waiting for him several weeks from now when he returns from QED. Perhaps the Gardens of Clementia will hold more appeal than you remember. No, Cidra spoke with conviction, aware of her inner decision. I won't change my mind. If he comes back for me, I'll be waiting. He has no way of knowing that for sure. He shouldn't put us to the test. Severance is looking for reassurance, if you ask me. It's odd, isn't it, Disma? We've trusted each other with our lives more than once during the past few days. Yet we're afraid to trust each other's feelings. I imagine things are much simpler in Clementia. Yes, said Cidra. They are. Severance silently sent up a word of thanks when the holotape crew managed to trigger the ghost's presentation inside the safehold. He had been mentally holding his breath, afraid that the showing he and Cidra had seen had been the final one. If that had been the case, he would have had to take a penalty cut on the contract he'd signed with the company. The safehold itself was still valuable, but not nearly so valuable as the contents. The mind call itself was no longer functioning. Either that or the conditions weren't right for activating it. When Severance and the exploration crew had finally located the safehold by a process of quartering all the terrain within an hour's walk from the river, he had seen at once that the protected circle had shrunk. It was obviously fading, and that meant the valuable scenes inside were probably about to disappear also. I'm not sure we'll get it to trigger again, the crew chief announced, but we've got it down on holotape. He looked pleased. A hell of a find, Severance. When you stumbled across this, it was really your lucky day. Enough history in here to keep half of Clementia busy for years. Severance stood in the vaulted entrance of the safehold, gazing at the bubbling stream where Cidra had been bathing the morning he'd awakened from the delirium. The stream was still barely inside the protected area. My lucky day, he agreed softly. He forced himself out of the reveries as a crew of technicians bustled past. Any sign of a mechanism to explain how all this operates? We could use the secret of keeping the terrain clear. Whatever the ghosts used, it's more efficient than the deflectors. Nothing so far. We've picked up no energy readings and no indications of any hardware hidden in the safehold walls. We may never find the answer. Might not be able to comprehend it if we do find it. This is damn sophisticated stuff, Severance. He nodded thoughtfully. They had the ability to survive. But in the end they just gave up. Never even made a try for space travel beyond the local system, the crew chief said. Doesn't make any sense. So much technical expertise gone to waste. Other things became more important, I guess. Severance looked at him. What could have been more important than the survival of the species? I don't know. What's more, I don't think I want to know. When are you taking the Vinton crew to the home of the big blue monsters? Now. Shouldn't be as hard to find as this was. I got a fix on it with a directional indicator. He also wanted to try another shard of one of the shells to see if it still had a homing effect. The Vinton crew was elated with their find. The shard worked as a directional device, but not because of mechanical reasons. The shells are naturally attracted to the metal of the ship, one technician announced. Like magnets that work over long distances. No wonder you had trouble with your signal. He ducked into the floodlit hole in the ship where uniformed men scurried around with great caution. What the hell happened to that gadget on top of the long case? The damage looks fresh. Severance ambled in after him and scrutinized the results of the pulsar on the device that had activated the illusions. Had a little trouble with that. He looked into the case. Going to open it? No. Not here. It'll have to be done under controlled atmospheric conditions. Don't want the skeleton dissolving into dust. Do you think it's that old? The technician shook his head. No. But we don't know how it will react to the atmosphere once the case is opened. Severance hung around for the rest of the day, assuring that his clients were satisfied. When the teams headed back toward the river to spend the night, he made his decision to leave for the XLX camp in the morning. The sensors were long overdue. Hey, Severance, stop worrying about the mail, Rand Bantforth said during dinner. You're making enough off these discoveries to let you forget whatever XLX was going to pay for the COD delivery. It's the principle of the thing, Severance growled. Yeah, well, 500,000 is a lot of consolation for a principal. Another man spoke up as he helped himself to ale. Severance isn't making 500 thou off of this. He's only getting 250. His lady gets the other half. That's one interesting female you left behind in Try Again, Severance. She's got enough credit to her name to buy a man his own mail ship. If I were you, I wouldn't wait too long to get back to her, or somebody else will take on the job of keeping her around. Cidra's not naive enough to fall for some fast-talking, renegade's line of Torla Minor. Severance swallowed his ale and hoped to hell he was right. I don't know, the other man offered. It's hard to figure women. Severance thought about that. He had figured Cidra out almost completely. But he needed her to be sure of herself, and she hadn't the time and the distance to do that. She had been through too much, too quickly, thanks to him. H owed it to her to give higher time and the peacefulness of Clementia in which to make her decision. Hey, said one of the holotape technicians. I bought along a free market playing field. Anyone interested? Severance smiled. I just happened to have a set of cubes on me. As he crawled into a lonely sleeper that night, Severance was aware of the same sense of heroic martyrdom he had experienced on board ship when he'd managed to refrain from seducing Cidra. He had discovered then that the feeling wasn't much compensation for denying himself her warm, sweetly willing body. Tonight he decided that heroic martyrdom didn't improve with practice. Fear gnawed at him as he lay staring at the curved ceiling of the tent. What if she was drawn back into the safe, secure world of Clementia? He was taking such a stupid risk by sending her back home, but he had to be sure of her. Chapter 19. I'm scared, Disma. That's what the problem is. Cidra gazed morosely into her half-empty mug of ale. Around her the patrons of the Bloodsucker went about the business of enjoying themselves amid a canopy of smoke and the occasional clatter of free market cubes. A big commercial freighter had arrived in port today, and the normal tavern crowd was augmented by the shipload of newcomers. The freighter was due to leave the following afternoon, and Cidra was scheduled to be on it. Disma eyed her friend with affection. Cidra was wearing her early evening gown, and her hair was done in its traditional neat coil of braids. Cidra was her old elegant self this evening, except in one thing. She was on her third mug of Renaissance rose ale. Disma found the process of watching Cidra drink interesting. Disma kept waiting for the effects to show. Surely the fine manners and the gentle-like grace would start disintegrating at any moment. The fact that neither had faded so far only went to show how strong a force good breeding could be. Disma was fascinated. If you're really scared, Cidra, you're certainly using a traditional means of overcoming the fear. Cidra gazed at her mug. Severance likes this stuff. I know. He should have been back yesterday, Disma. He said he'd be back in 3 days. This is the 4th day. Disma sighed. I realize that. Renaissance has a way of making folks change their plans in the field. You know he's all right. He checked in with security this morning. He's not in trouble, Cidra. He's deliberately delaying his return so he can avoid having to see me again before I leave. You're getting paranoid. Cidra considered that. Do you think so? Harmonics never get paranoid. Everybody likes harmonics. No reason to be paranoid. But I'm not a harmonic. So it's okay for me to be paranoid. That's a wonderful string of logic. Have some more ale. Thank you, Cidra said with grave politeness. I will. She sipped reflectively and then said with an air of great insight, he's a loner. That's the real problem. I think he likes me, but he's basically a loner. He doesn't want to allow anyone, especially a woman, into his life on a permanent basis. The cabin of a mail ship is very small, you know. I know. But the two of you got here from Lovelady without murdering each other. And now he's sending me away. He's the one who's scared, Cidra. He knows he can't offer you the things you'll have if you go back to Clementia. Ha. Severance could have used that excuse before he negotiated 500,000 in credit for the safehold and the alien ship. It won't wash now. He's rich. Disma's mouth curved wryly. Don't forget he's only got 250,000. Cidra flushed guiltily. He annoyed me. That's the only reason I made him give me a separate contract. I was very irritated. The fact is, even if he had all 500,000, he'd spend every last credit on severance pay, limited. This time he's determined to make his plans a success. He's seen everything fall apart on him at least twice already. Cidra frowned. What are you talking about? Disma shrugged. He went into partnership with Racer because Racer had some capital and wanted to be a wheeler and dealer. Racer had the credit but not enough business sense to make it work. Severance had the business sense? Disma nodded. Severance had the ideas and the ambition. But the partnership didn't work out. It's a little difficult to continue in a partnership with someone who's willing to leave you in a sinkswamp with a killweaver, Cidra said. Disma arched one brow. Is that what happened? Interesting. Everyone knew something catastrophic had happened, but no one knew exactly what. Don't tell him I told you, Cidra said urgently. I think I might have had a bit too much ale. I seem to be babbling. Don't worry, Cidra. I won't say a word. As I said, after the partnership was dissolved, Severance was left with only his ship and virtually no capital. He and his brother started building things up again, and just as they were beginning to see some progress, Jude went down on QED. I know. Cidra swallowed a wave of sadness. It was very hard for Severance to handle. The emotional trauma was only part of it. The other half of the story is that the loss of the ship sent Severance pay, limited back to Circle 1. For a year Severance took some awful risks as a bonus man here on Renaissance for some exploration companies. XLX was one of the firms he worked for during that period. Do you think he took the risks because he just didn't care anymore? I don't know. People take risks for different reasons. I know he was a bitter, angry man for a long time. He spent more time in the jungle than he did in Try Again. But when the year was over, he seemed to have pulled himself together. In the meantime, he had accumulated enough bonus money to finance Severance pay. He's been working his way back for a third try at the big time ever since. And now he's got another crack at it. Cidra sighed. I suppose I shouldn't get in his way. But are you going to get in his way? Disma asked perceptively. I prefer to think of myself as a useful and extremely valuable member of his crew. Cidra took another sip of ale. Now all I have to do is make him see me that way. Hey, Severance, how much will you take for the little lady? Kraft grinned cheerfully as he helped make the skimmer fast to the dock. He examined Severance's dusty boots and sweat-stained shirt, which were revealed under the marina's bright lights. It was obvious that the past 4 days had been hard and long. But, then, most days on the river and in the jungle were. The balmy night air was thicker than usual, heralding the approach of a storm. Borgia and Medici were quickly being veiled by clouds. Severance and the skimmer's pilot had made it back barely in time. Skimmers avoided travel by night if at all possible, especially when a storm was in the offing. But Severance had pushed for the unorthodox travel that afternoon because they were so close to try again and Cidra was due to ship out the next day. The thought of not seeing her before she left had led him to give the skimmer pilot an extra 50 in credit for traveling after dark. Folks were always on the lookout for easy bonus money on Renaissance. You haven't got enough credit to buy her craft, and you know it. Severance jumped onto the dock, his stained travel pack slung over one shoulder. Even if I decided to sell, you'd have one renegade devil of a time trying to collect. The lady's got a mind of her own. She's also got 250,000 of her own from what I hear. Kraft chuckled as he reached down into the skimmer to take a container the pilot was handing to him. A lady like her draws a considerable amount of attention in a place like this. Severance, about to walk down the dock toward shore, glanced back. Anyone been making too much of a nuisance of himself? Why? You going to feed him to the river if he has? After I separate his head from his neck. Let's have it, Kraft. What's been happening? Calm down, Severance. She and Disma haven't been seen apart since he left. Saints know a few hopeful types tried to get Cidra interested in a nice steak dinner or something, but no one had any luck. She doesn't like meat. Severance readjusted the travel pack and stalked off toward the bank. Maybe that's why she's drinking ale at the Bloodsucker tonight, Kraft called after him. A lot of protein but not much meat in a glass of rose ale. One of these days, Kraft, someone's going to accidentally push you into the river. But Severance didn't pause this time. He headed away from the dock facilities and up the dusty street, driven by a sense of urgency. He had so little time left with Cidra, she must have gotten very bored to have gone to the Bloodsucker for a drink. Maybe Disma had talked her into it. Cidra never did more than sip elegantly at a glass of wine or ale. At this late hour she was probably tired of killing time in a tavern. She wasn't really cut out for spending her evenings that way. At least there was no cord racer around to cause trouble that night. Severance decided he wouldn't chew Cidra out for spending a couple of hours in a tavern. After all, there wasn't much to do in a place like Try Again. Besides, from what Kraft had said, it sounded as if Disma was doing a good job of playing chaperone. He paced more quickly along the street, anticipating the pleasure in Cidra's eyes when she saw him again. It was Disma who saw Severance come through the door. She glanced up, took in his dusty, stained appearance and the intensity of his eyes as he scanned the room, and then she smiled at Cidra. He's back. Cidra blinked. She had just finished the last of her third mug of ale. Who's back? The love of your life. Oh, him. Eyes narrowed to help her concentrate, Cidra looked around and saw Severance starting toward her down an aisle of tables. She smiled wistfully. Isn't he wonderful, Disma? He's interesting, I'll say that for him. Cidra's smile congealed into a frown as Severance reached the table. She glared up at him. You're late, she announced. Severance tilted his head to one side, studying her as he let the pack slide to the floor. You're drunk. I have been drowning my sorrows. Ask Disma. Severance slid a grim glance at Disma. How the hell did she get into this condition? I did it all by myself, Cidra answered. I can see that. Why is it that every time I leave you on your own you get into trouble? I'm not in any trouble. You're the one in trouble. Did you give those sensors away to X1 Lex? Severance leaned down, planting his hands on the table, to confront her. His eyes were glittering with a mixture of masculine irritation, desire, and possessiveness. No, I did not give the sensors to XLX. Did you get full credit on delivery? She demanded. Yes, Otana Rainforest, I did. Satisfied? No. You should have gotten hazardous duty credit on top of the agreed upon fee. I got a contract for another shipment instead. Does that please you? Cidra's severe expression changed back into a warm, approving smile. Oh, Severance, that's wonderful. Thank you. He looked at Disma, who was smiling. How much has she had? 3 mugs. Holding it very well, I might add. She's spaced out of her little mind. She's been waiting for you, Disma said simply. Today she started worrying that you wouldn't return until after she left. She should have known better. That's no excuse, I, Cidra interrupted grandly, don't need any excuses. I am a financially independent woman who can do as she likes. Too much education and too much money. It's a bad combination in a woman. Severance straightened. Are you ready to leave, Cidra? Yes, please. Where are we going? Someplace where there's a bed. He reached down to take her arm. You need more than a bed, Severance. You need a shower. Disma grinned up at him. Why don't you take her back to my place? I won't be home for a while yet. You're welcome to spend the night. Fred's waiting there too. I appreciate the offer, Disma. I'll take you up on it. He started to tug Cidra out of her chair. Now wait just one spaced second. Cidra lifted her chin. I have decided that this relationship of ours is based entirely too much on bed. It's too physically oriented. We need to talk. We need to explore the intellectual side of this whole thing. Then we need to discuss the business aspects of it. You'd better sit down, Teague Severance. We have a lot to discuss. Severance regarded her politely. The thing is, Cidra, you're not in any condition to carry on an intellectual analysis of our relationship. You're spaced, Otana Rainforest. Drunk as a renegade on a bonus spree. Oh. How interesting. I hadn't realized. It's all right, he assured her, hauling her to her feet. Just leave everything to me. I'll handle it. He scooped her up and slung her easily over one shoulder. Cidra's yellow gold gown swirled around his stained shirt. Cidra examined the floor from her upside-down position. Then she steadied herself by grasping his utility loop. She smiled reassuringly at Disma. It's all right. He always handles things. Pilot in command, you know. I understand, Disma said gently. Good night, Cidra. Good night, Disma. Disma spoke to Severance. The doors keyed to Cidra's voice print. All I have to worry about is getting her to say something coherent when we get to your place. See you in the morning, Disma. And thanks. Severance clamped one hand firmly around Cidra's thighs, plucked the travel pack off the floor, and started toward the door. He ignored the interested attention of the tavern crowd. He was out on the street, striding toward Disma's before he realized that Cidra was humming contentedly. I didn't know you were musical, he growled. I can do a great many things. Excellent education. I'm going to put you in a bed and let you show me what you do best. You don't think we're placing too much emphasis on the physical side of this relationship? Cidra asked with both whimsy and worry. I think, Severance told her, that memories of you wrapped around me are all I'm going to have to keep me warm for a long time. Cidra sighed. You shouldn't send me away, Severance. I have to send you away. I know. I've thought it all out. I know you have to do it. But I'm scared, Severance. So am I. Cidra lapsed into silence for the remainder of the trip. When Severance stopped at Disma's door, she obediently said her name into the voice lock and then felt herself being carried into the house. Severance walked into the bedroom she had been using and stood Cidra carefully on her feet. She circled his neck with her arms and smiled wistfully up at him. I've missed you. Not half as much as I've missed you. He pulled her close, feeling her gown whip lightly around his legs as he did so. She lifted her face for his kiss, and he took her mourn with a hunger he knew he would be feeling frequently during the days and nights to come. For a long moment he simply helped himself to the promise of her, drinking deeply of the nectar that was waiting. She melted against him the way he had remembered, and Severance wondered how he would last without her during the long time ahead. The thought that she might not be waiting when the ordeal was over filled him with a dangerous tension. He realized abruptly that his kiss was growing rough and heavy. She was such a soft little creature,